Donald Trump's maximalist approach to negotiation has not served him well so far in his second term. What would he do to regain his diminished credibility in the many high-stake negotiations he's engaged in right now? Which thread will he follow through? And what does it mean for your money? In his influential book, Legal Negotiation and Settlement, legal scholar Gerald Williams identified two primary types of negotiators. The first type he called the cooperative problem-solving negotiators. Let's call this type A. These negotiators emphasize fairness and integrity. They prefer consensus building over positioning bargaining and aim for mutually beneficial outcomes. Williams' study found that 65% of attorneys fell into this category, with 59% of them considered effective negotiators. Williams called the second type of negotiators, type B, the competitive adversarial negotiators. These negotiators view negotiation as a zero-sum game and often employ aggressive tactics. Williams' study found that 24% of attorneys fell into this category, with only 25% deemed effective. Among the competitive adversarial negotiators, type B, Williams identified a subset that he called the maximalist negotiator, type B1. The maximalist usually begins with high demands or low offers. As a strategy, this has three major advantages. 1. Extreme position hides the negotiator's real or minimum expectations. It keeps the other side guessing. 2. The initial extreme stance provides room to make concessions later. 3. Such tactics may pressure the other party to lower their expectations or make larger concessions. Williams found that the maximalist negotiator, B1, might prevail in some situations, especially when paired with cooperative opponents. However, maximalist tactics are more likely to result in no deal being reached. This is especially the case when the maximalist develops a reputation as an unreasonable bargainer, and the other negotiators cater their strategy accordingly. The purest treasure mortal times affords is spotless reputation, wrote Shakespeare in Richard II. In a series of experiments by Catherine Tinsley of Georgetown University and Kathleen O'Connor at London Business School, participants were told that they will be negotiating with someone who had either a tough reputation, a cooperative reputation, or an unknown reputation. Although the reputation was randomly assigned, negotiators with a reputation for tough, self-interested bargaining fared worse than not only those with a reputation for collaborative bargaining, but also those with an unknown reputation. These experiments showed that tough guys finish last. What does this tell us about the likely outcomes of the many high-stake negotiations that Donald Trump is currently engaged in? Trump is a maximalist negotiator, that is of type B1. In Art of the Deal, he wrote that my style of deal-making is quite simple and straightforward. I aim very high, and then I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get what I'm after. In Trump's first term, the combination of his maximalist negotiating style and his feigned irrationality worked mostly to his advantage. A good example was a game of chicken with China that resulted in the Phase 1 trade deal in 2020 that committed China to increase imports of U.S. goods, strengthen intellectual property protection, and expand market access for U.S. firms. Another example was Trump's threat to pull the U.S. out of NATO unless Europe started spending 2% of its GDP on defense. His aggressive posturing jolted Europe into action. Between 2016 and 2020, non-US NATO members increased defense spending by over $100 billion. However, Trump's maximalist negotiating style has not served him as well in his second term. His global trade war has so far produced one memorandum of understanding with the UK. His one-too-many capitulations have convinced both America's allies and adversaries that his recklessness is a tactic, that he has no stomach to follow through his more extreme threats. In foreign policy, Trump has neither succeeded in bullying Ukraine into giving Russia what it wanted, nor has he carried out his threat to impose sanctions on Russia unless it agreed to a ceasefire. Even Iran does not take him too seriously. This week, Iran's supreme leader rejected Trump's latest nuclear deal proposal that allows Iran to continue to enrich uranium at a low level during the first phase of the deal. What Iran and Russia have figured out is that Trump doesn't want high oil prices. What other countries have figured out is that Trump doesn't want to burst the US stock market bubble. At this moment, it would seem that Trump is validating Gerald Williams' finding that maximalist tactics are more likely to result in no deal being reached. But surely this will be anticlimactic. Surely Trump will have to find a way to regain his diminished credibility. The US auto industry sounded the alarm this week as China's rare earth export restrictions started to bite. Rare earths are used in everything from autos to household appliances and fighter jets. China, which controls over 90% of the global processing capacity, imposed export restrictions in early April in response to Trump's tariffs. Last month, Ford shut down production of the Ford Explorer at its Chicago plant for a week because of the rare earth shortage. Rare earths have emerged as a major leverage for China in its dealing with Trump. Indeed, Trump's partial rollback of tariffs on Chinese imports in May was widely interpreted as a strategic concession aimed at alleviating a rare earth supply crisis. It would appear that rare earths have much to do with a call this week between Trump and Xi Jinping that, according to Beijing, came at the request of Trump. After the call, Trump implied that the two men had resolved the issue with respect to China's rare earth exports, but provided no details. According to the Chinese media, Xi urged Trump on the call to withdraw negative initiatives against China and warned Trump against letting Taiwan separatists drag the two countries into a dangerous situation of conflict and confrontation. I'm starting to think that the reality that the US has no way to get around China's monopoly in the production of rare earths in the very short term may stop Trump from escalating the trade war against China in the foreseeable future. All else being equal, this is positive for both stocks and bonds, and maybe even the US dollar. Trump seems determined not to be dragged into the Russia-Ukraine war. The Atlantic magazine this week quoted a Trump advisor saying that Trump was impressed with the audacity of Ukraine's attack on the Russian strategic bomber fleet last week, but that he thought Zelensky's focus should have been on the Ukraine-Russia negotiation in Istanbul. Trump said after a call with Putin this week that Putin told him that Russia would respond to Ukraine's attack. I read this as Trump telegraphing that he does not plan to respond to an escalation of the war. Trump seems worried that if he gets more involved in the war, it becomes his war. This is probably why not a week passes without him reminding his supporters that this is Biden's war and not his war. The US Senate is working on a new sanctions bill against Russia. The bill appears to have the support of a veto-proof majority, but Trump can pressure John Thune to stop the bill from coming to the floor. It's hard to say how long Thune can stall the Russia hawks itching to have it out with Russia. Much will depend on how much the war escalates from here. My baseline scenario is that Trump keeps kicking the can 1 week at a time, but not much more. The likely escalation of fighting in Ukraine in the weeks to come will provide support to gold. The Democrats trolled Trump this week by parking a taco truck in front of the Republican National Committee's headquarters. Trump is under growing pressure to repair his reputation before it diminishes his credibility further. Iran might just provide him with the means. Iran's supreme leader's rejection of his nuclear deal proposal this week should put an end to any hope that Iran will give up nuclear enrichment in exchange for sanction relief. Even if Trump has gone soft over Iran, he has limited room to make additional concessions. Over 200 Republican lawmakers sent a joint letter to him urging him to only agree to a deal that dismantles Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, the 2-month deadline Trump set for reaching a deal with Iran will expire on June 12th. Trump said last month that Iran's centrifuges will either blow up nicely in a deal or viciously without one. My bet is that Trump will soon have to follow through his threat. It is interesting that the Saudis warned Iran to reach nuclear deal with Trump will risk an Israeli attack. This means the Gulf countries are now prepared for a potential Iranian retaliation. It also means that they will be ready to increase oil production to offset any sudden drop in Iranian oil exports. Trump has spent the past 2 months playing to the anti-war wing of the MAGA movement. This investment will now give him a freer hand to decide what's good for America and for his presidency. The geopolitical risk premium in oil price has been rising over the past 2 weeks. Oil vol, following the recent sell-off, is starting to look attractive. What about the 100-plus countries that Trump has declared a trade war on? The end of the 90-day pause is now only a month away. A deal with India that will see India buy more US oil, soybeans, and defense equipment looks very likely. Negotiation with Vietnam is going less well, with the US insisting that Hanoi reduces imports from China. Negotiation with Japan is also not going well. Japan has not budged from its position that the tariffs are not acceptable and continue to urge the US to immediately drop all the tariffs, including those levied on automobiles, auto parts, aluminum, and steel. The new South Korean government is not in a hurry to close the deal with the US. They're playing for time and will wait to see what happens with the US negotiations with China and Japan. The negotiation with the EU is slow, with the US and Europe remaining divided over what to do about the Russia-Ukraine war. Europe has no reason to cut Trump any slack. It is very unlikely that the EU will accept a deal modeled on the UK deal. My guess is that none of these countries, with the possible exception of India, wants to be the first to do a deal with Trump. They have all witnessed Trump's capitulations. I don't know if they're coordinating in their responses to Trump, but my guess is that they feel safety in numbers. Each country on its own is no match for the US, but together they might think that they have a good shot to push back Trump. This will leave Trump with no choice but to up the ante. My bet is that we will see the return of a reckless Trump soon. My bet is that Trump the madman will try to bury Trump the taco. Ironically, the more the market tries to see through this, the more crazy Trump might decide he has to be.